All right, thank you guys so much. We are continuing with our Seeing Through Gebser series. We are in part 4, I think. We're in the mental structure. So first, of course, it was the archaic magic, then the mythical, and now the mental structure. If you have not seen my other videos, as always, go watch them first. Now, I've ranted and raved, or more ranted, about rationalism on this channel enough, and I will do more. So I don't see any reason why I need to slow this down with more ranting about rationalism. I'm going to point out the deficiencies, but that's only because that's where Gebser points out the deficiencies. So if you've seen my other videos, Kill Rationalism, I'm not just going to be ranting this entire video. We're going to be going through the whole structure now. This video is going to be longer than normal because there's just simply more time and space-time allotted to this structure. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure. It could be because, of course, we sort of live in the mental structure as Westerners. We are rational. We think of things rationally, for better or worse. So maybe it's just he has more to say on it because of that. But this might, because this is so long, this probably is going to be a two-parter. I don't want to make it a 2-hour video, so I might do 40 minutes today and then 40 minutes tomorrow. And we'll see. What else? Also, shout out to John David Ebert. He allowed me to interview him on his channel, and I've said it before, but please go check out John's channel. John inspired me. Not only was he the one who put me on to Jean Gebser, um, he's put me on to just a ton of great thinkers. I've done his course. I've done Nietzsche. I've done Carl Jung. I've done the German idealist philosophy. I've done mythology. I've done transformations of consciousness through time. What else? And then, of course, Gebser's The Ever-Present Origin. They're all great classes. Some of them are free, like his art class. It's not completed, but there's a lot in there that you can get that's free. So shout out to John. I did an interview with him. Thank you, John. Please go watch that. You are the man. Now, let's get into it. Starting with Gebser. Excuse me. In our description of the perspectival world, we have already given a partial outline of the mental structure, but in doing so we were more or less compelled to view everything from the vantage point of the emergence of perspectivity in the decisive year 1500, when the perspectival European world finally mutated from the unperspectival European world of the Middle Ages. In order to describe the mental structure at this juncture in our discussion, we shall have to proceed from a different point of departure. Now, mentally, we like to work backwards from our own mode of thought, rational thought. As I've explained here, and as Gebser explains, you don't want to do that. You want to go starting from the beginning and going forward. The rational way, the historical way, is we start from now and we work backwards. We start from the present. No, let's work backwards and get to the present. So we're going to try. We will be analyzing the mental consciousness structure and the world created by it, but we're going to be doing it in a different way because we're going to be integrating the mythical and the magical, the unperspectable world, because it's necessary to do so. Because this is how humans experience it. They didn't experience it by starting out mentally and rationally in the mental consciousness structure. They started out with, of course, the archaic, and then they built up there. So that's how we're going to try to analyze this. Rather than attempting to describe retrospectively the rise of the perspectival world from our present time, we shall endeavor to follow the path which leads from our origin to our time, which begins with the Occidental or Western structuration of our consciousness. There you go. We must also remember a fundamental fact, namely that the events of 500 BC in Greece had to be repeated around 1250 AD by European man, and his basis was considerably broadened because of 3 major achievements, all containing an element of incipient perspectivity: the Greek theory of knowledge, the Hebrew doctrine of salvation, and Roman legal and political theory. So remember what I said in the 3 worlds. There was a perspectival phase from about the Renaissance, 14th, 15th, 13th century. That's perspectival phase proper. Remember the pre-perspectival phase, the ancient Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, Heraclitus, I think. Those guys. There was a pre-perspectival world, so that's what he's talking about when he says 500 BC Greece. That was the incipient. So the lesson there is consciousness structure is it's almost like a turtle peeking out of its shell. It won't just snap and everyone's all of a sudden rational. It has to sort of peek its way out and then blossom, kind of like a flower. So what you'll see is areas where you can see it's incipient. It's starting to come out. The sun is coming out of the shadow, but it's not there yet. That's why it's always important to be on the lookout. And that's what he said. So there's a few things that led um, to pre-perspectival, and then we had the, what are they called, medieval times, or the Dark Ages. Dark by what standard? The perspectival standard, the rational standard. Let's see. If we were to proceed in our discussion exclusively from the standpoint of this perspectival European world, we would be justified in defining it, even at this stage, as rational. The Latin notion of ratio also gives its direction. Even in scholastic terminology, which is derived from Aristotle, man is called an animal rationale, an animal with the gift of rationality, Homo sapiens, Homo, man, sapien, wise, rationality. And in the word ratio, which means to reckon as well as to calculate in the sense of to think and understand, we meet up with the principal characteristic of the perspectival world, directedness and perspectivity, together with unavoidably sectorial partitioning. This will be explained more, but these are the key facets of mental rational thought. Directed judgment. It identifies rationality. Rationality identifies correctness with direction and judgment. If I were to say that I don't know, Barack Obama was 9 feet tall and 700 pounds, the direction would be towards Obama, and then we would formulate a judgment. In this case, that is just incorrect. There's just no getting around that. Let's see. Just as we were able to discern an efficient as well as deficient phase of the magic structure, where the one was distinguished by spellcasting, the other by sorcery, so too are we able to discern two such phases in the mental structure, the efficient or mental phase and the deficient or rational phase which resulted from it. So just like all the other structures, there is an efficient aspect to it, and there is a deficient aspect to it. One, you in rejecting rationalism, the idea that what can be considered true by means of rational thought is exclusively true, you want to be careful to not remember the efficient aspects of rationality. It is the underlying foundation of vaccines and longer lifespan and greater wealth and individual rights and science and all the great stuff about that. So you don't want to make the mistake of buying in, ironically, into the rational either or thinking by saying, okay, I'm just going to reject rationality entirely and go back to irrationality. No one wants that. That's absurd. But it also does have a deficient phase, and we'll get into that more. He says, we have chosen the term mental to designate the consciousness structure still dominant today for two reasons. In the first place, its original meaning, still preserved in the Sanskrit root ma, with secondary roots such as man, mat, me, and men, shows an extraordinary wealth of interrelationships. Even more importantly, the words formed from this group all express the specific characteristics of the mental structure. And in the second place, this word is the first or initial word of our Occidental culture. It is the first word of the first verse of the first canto of the first major Western utterance. I refer, of course, to the menon, accusative of menace, the opening word of the Iliad, in which the word mental is present. I think that is super cool. So one of the foundational mythologies that built Western civilization, the first is what he says. The first verse of the first canto of the first major refers to mental. Again, little things. Gebser sees these profound implications just on these little changes, and we will see this when he talks about when you can see the birth of the mental world coming into being and the changes that seem arbitrary, but they're actually very powerful. I thought that was very cool. In manifestations originating in the mythical structure, says Gebser, nothing is accidental. Everything has its correspondence, meaning, and significance. I think I made a mistake there. Let's see. Okay, that's right. Thus, there is apt to be a corresponding significance in the fact that this earliest among the accounts of our Western world begins with this word, particularly since the Iliad does not only evoke an image, but rather describes an ordered course of action by men, and not just gods, in a directed, that is, causal sequence. So with the mental world, when the ego because the mental world was discovered, was created via the birth. Excuse me. I've had a long week. I'm a little tired. Because the mental consciousness structure was birthed from the discovery of space. Excuse me. Um. Oh shit. That's right. To understand an objectified world, there must be a corresponding subject. Now, in our world, that's psychologically the ego, and then it's also philosophically the ego, the subject, the perceiver of the world. So it's important because as the ego comes up, man's estimation of himself rises, and in turn, it sort of necessarily brings down the estimation of gods. There is a reason atheism comes about with rational thought. The Greek word, this is my favorite stuff when he makes the etymological connections. I just think it's so cool. The Greek word menace, meaning wrath and courage, comes from the same stem as the word menos, which means resolve, anger, courage, and power. It is related also to the Latin word mens, which has an unusually complex set of meanings: intent, anger, thinking, thought, understanding, deliberation, disposition, mentality, imagination. Keep those in the back of your mind. What is fundamental here is already evident in the substance of these words. It is the first intimation of the emergence of directed or discursive thought. That is mental thinking, my friend. Directed and discursive. We're pointing somewhere and we're going from topic to topic. We are controlling to a large extent, to a profound extent compared to the mythical magical world, our thoughts. In the unperspectable world, we were kind of subsumed in our consciousness, and there was no ego separation to think, I am being controlled by anger when my girlfriend throws out my food. Without that I, there's no real way you can kind of control it. Think Stoicism. Stoicism is a great example of this. And I think I'm actually going to do a separate video about why meditation is so profound, because I think it's a balance between the mental consciousness structure and the mythical consciousness structure. But Stoicism privileges the self, the subject, the ability to perceive and to be aware you're perceiving, and it privileges rationality as a way of acting as a system that can quickly and efficiently filter out positive and negative emotions, separate them from each other, and then use rational thought to help you improve your life. That's a good example of this. But that's what's happening. The subject and directed discursive thought, it's a big part. It is the first intimation of the emergence of directed or discursive thought. Whereas mythical thinking, to the extent that it can be called thinking, was a shaping or designing of images in the imagination which took place within the confines of the polar cycle. Discursive thought is fundamentally different. It is no longer polar related, enclosed in and reflecting polarity from which it gains its energy, but rather directed towards objects and duality, creating and directing this duality and drawing its energy from the individual ego. We are in a completely different way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other than the mythical consciousness structure, no matter how similar it may appear. the, the polarities have turned into dualistic binaries. They're separate now. This process is an extraordinary event which is literally earth-shaking. It bursts man's protective psychic circle in congruity with the psychic, naturalistic, cosmic, temporal world of polarity and enclosure. The ring is broken, and man steps out of the two-dimensional surface into space, which he will attempt to master by his thinking. This is an unprecedented event, an event that fundamentally alters the world. Now I'm going to repeat something real quick. The ring is broken, and man steps out of the two-dimensional surface into space. Now the ring, like he said, was protective psychic circle and congruity with the psychic, naturalistic, cosmic, temporal world of polarity and enclosure. So the 2D flat circle, for all its flaws, conferred psychic and, I guess in turn, spiritual unity. That's a big, big, big deal. And we'll explore more of this in a second. So let's go back to that first paragraph for a second. The Greek word menace, meaning wrath and courage, comes from the same stem as the word menos, which means resolve, anger, courage. Here's some more associations with the word: intent, anger, thinking, thought, understanding, deliberation, disposition, mentality, imagination. What is the weird connection between wrath and thought? That doesn't seem to be a particularly causal connection. I think it makes sense when you realize, as he just said, the polar cycle that closes in and on each other on the two poles confers psychic unity. That has been broken. Now the two poles have become dualistic binaries. They're no longer similar. They're different. There has been a division in the unity of the psyche. That is a problem. That is hostile. That makes the world appear dangerous and hostile and aggressive to you. This is why I believe, I guess, a student of Carl Jung, a psychologist named Eric Neumann, this is why I believe he thinks that rationality is inherently masculine. And this is why men are generally better at rational thought than women, because rational thought requires, as just said, to face the now hostile world. I can't attack it with the virtues of love and understand it. The virtues of love, I'm going to be defeated by this now hostile world out there and in here. So I must tap in to the more aggressive and wrathful, maybe, urges within myself. And of course, men are obviously more physically aggressive and more violent and more wrathful than women. So that's why I believe rationality is inherently more masculine. Now, that's not necessarily that doesn't mean men are better than women. As I said, there are problems with rationality. If you've watched my other videos, when I say someone's rational or too rational, that's not necessarily a good thing. Don't think I'm giving some backhanded compliment where it sounds like I'm criticizing you, but I'm really giving you a compliment. I'm not. Being too rational is a problem, as we're about to explore, and as you can see in my other videos. Oh, and this is fun too. So he says this event is recorded in the myth of the birth of Athena, and its imagery and allusions are unmistakable. This is just a fun way of picturing and imagining. Again, we're no longer sticking with just mental abstraction. So if we can put it to myth and put it to image and invoke a different form of thought realization in addition to rational understanding, mental understanding, let's do it. Zeus has wedded Metis, the personification of reason and intelligence, who, being one of the daughters of Oceanus, parentheses, the river encircling the world, had the power of transforming herself. Fearing the birth of a son more powerful than he, Zeus devours Metis, who is already pregnant with a daughter, thereby transporting her into his own body. When Hephaestus, or Prometheus or Hermes, split Zeus's head with an axe, this daughter, Athena, is born. Pindar has described this birth brought about by the blow of an axe as having taken place accompanied by a terrible tumult throughout nature, as well as by the astonishment of the entire pantheon. The sea surges forth. The sea is the all-encompassing soul. Surges forth. And Olympus and earth, until that moment polarly related, tremble and shake. The carefully preserved balance is destroyed. Even Helios interrupts his course. The circle is indeed interrupted, and from the breach, the wound, a new possibility of the world, emerges. So, let's see. Zeus devours Metis, right? Which was the personification of reason and intelligence, who was already pregnant with a daughter, thereby transporting her into his own body. And then, of course, when Zeus's head is split, containing, I forget the names already, Metis in there, Athena is born from the head, not the genitals, right? From the head. And then he says, in the name Athena, the root ma, me, is not visible. Oh, by the way, so Athena is born from the head, clearly symbolizing abstraction, mental intelligence. But what else happened? He describes this trembling shake. It came at the cost of an earth-shattering event. So this is trying to communicate yes, reason and rationality is a good thing. It is a good thing, but it comes with a strong wrath, a strong cost associated with it that rationalists don't want to take into account. They're deluded. They think everything is just progressing. Everything soon we'll all just be transhumanists. In the name Athena, the root Mami is not visible. Yet, as befits the mythical, it is invisibly present in the name of her mother, Metis. In the names of her, I don't even want to, Alcaushers, Prometheus, and Hermes, and also in one of Athena's attributes, the head of Medusa. In the Roman tradition, Pallas Athena is called Minerva, originally Minerva, while the earliest Etruscan names for her are Minerva and Menfra. I apologize for the mispronunciation. It's probably not the best to hear. But the point is, the root for Athena, which was birthed from intelligence, is ma, me, the I, ego, me, subject, intelligence, object. And this goddess, variously described as pugnacious, bellicose, and yet bright, ethereally clear thinking, knowledgeable of darkness and of never failing aim, is the protectress of Achilles, whose menace is sung by the Iliad, and it is she who stands by him in battle, battle unleashed and successfully fought by this very wrath. I thought that was a cool mythical way of, oh, this is a huge part, a mythical way of understanding the birth of the rational or mental consciousness structure. He says, in yet another culture that has been constituted for our own, we have an example of this decisive consciousness mutation which took place in Greece about 1225 BC, in which the element of anger had an important role. We refer, of course, to the anger of Moses, the awakener of the nation of Israel. Bearing himself the guilt of murder, he confronts the Israelites with the vengeance of the one God. It is the birth of monotheism, counterpart of the birth in man of the awakened ego. And it is also the birth of dualism. Man is here, God is there. They are no longer polar correspondences or complements, but stand opposite one another as dualism. The individual is not a polar complement of God, for if he were, he would have no need of a mediator. And so the Trinity too is born, a further characteristic of the three-dimensional mental structure. I think this is awesome. Now, I'm not a Christian, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know anything about the Bible, the substance of it. But this is amazing in my opinion. So, of course, take Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. He talks about the gods, plural. There was no Jesus Christ, God, Christian, monotheist God yet. It was the gods. What Gebser is saying, there is a reason that God, singular, came about when it did, because it corresponds in the same way that the ego has solidified itself into a singular me, a singular sense of I. It is now a consolidated singular one. Same thing with the gods. The gods have consolidated and subsumed themselves into one God, God. And as he says, let's see, ego. And it is also the birth of dualism. Man is here, God is there. They are no longer polar correspondences or complements. If they were, in a contradictory way, mentally, rationally, one is contained within the other. Again, think the yin and the yang. It really is a perfect symbol. We've got, not only is it the black and white balancing each other, but there's a little black dot in the white section and there's a white dot in the black section. They are contained within each other because they fall in on each other. There's really no separation between the two. They are the same. They might appear differently, but contained within them is the other polar complement. You can't have one without the other. No, they feed off each other. They need each other. To separate one without the other is to separate both of them because one is contained within the other. Excuse me. But now he says there's a mediator. So instead of the boom, boom polarity and the circle falling in, now we have a triangle. Real quick, I want to show you something. Let's see. Okay. So we have my amazing circle. Okay, ignore the number there. We have my amazing circle that looks like it was drawn by a blind 3-year-old. Now, that's the symbol of the mythical consciousness structure. Now, see that triangle? We have the triangle. That is the symbol of the mental consciousness structure because we have the binaries, and we'll get to that. And then the measuring of thought. The measuring thought formulating a directed judgment up here. Now, contained within this circle, within this symbol, I should say, is the greatness and the Achilles heel of rationality. So within this triangle here, you will have a more clear vision. Your clarity will be greater and you will understand the world in a more realistic, rational way. Problem is, you see everything outside this triangle? This is the problem with rationalism, my friend. Rationalism is when it sectors off apart from it and transposes the whole onto the part. That is to say, pretends the part is the whole, treats the part as the whole when it's not. It never is. So that is pretty cool. And then, of course, you have Father, Son, Holy Ghost. If it was the mythical way, you would have man, God, but they would close in, you are God and God is man. We are two halves of a whole. You can't remove us and get the same thing. All right, let's see. Where else are we? Okay, here we go. Here we have discovered the link between thinking and wrath, between Greek menos, Latin mens, and Greek menace. Anger, not blind wrath, but thinking wrath, gives thought and action its direction. It is ruthless and inconsiderate, that is, it does not look backwards. It turns man away from his previous world of mythical enclosure and aims forward, like the lance or like Achilles poised for battle. It individualizes man from his previously valid world, emphasizing his singularity and making his ego possible. We deliberately emphasize man as an individual, from mens, menace, and man derived from the same root. So, no longer are we trapped in this sort of cosmic cycle of man and world, man and God, where God sing through me. I am a vessel to a certain extent of the powers of God. God sing through me and give me the power to act in the way that I need it. I rely on you and you need me so you can spread your teachings and powers. We're done with that. Now we're in the world of me. God is over there. You're not going to sing through me because I'm a person. I'm a biological evolutionary being. Um, big big change, big switch, and there's always a lot of conflict when these things happen. Now let's see. He said the root then. I'm skipping ahead. We're on page 77. The root then, on which the word mental is based, carries within itself the germ of an entire world, which takes on form and shape and becomes an effective reality in the mental structuration. Even if we recall only the most important of the words and ignore any additional examples, we can circumscribe the essence of this mental structure. Here it is, the essence of the mental structure. It is a world of man, not God. That is, a predominantly human world where man is the measure of all things, by Protagoras. That is big. Where man himself thinks and directs his thought. Thinks and directs this thought, and the world which he measures, to which he aspires, is a material world, a world of objects outside himself with which he is confronted. Here lie the rudiments of the great formative concepts, the mental abstractions which take the place of the mythical images and are, in a certain sense, formula or patterns of gods, i.e., idols. Anthropomorphism, dualism, rationalism, finalism, utilitarianism, materialism. In other words, the rational components of the perspectival world. When compared to the mythical structure, with its temporal psychic emphasis, the transition to the mental structure suggests a fall from time into space. Natural temporicity, that is. Man steps out of the sheltering two-dimensional circle and it confines into three-dimensional space. Here he no longer exists within polar complementarity. Here he is in confrontation with an alien world, a dualism that must be bridged by a synthesis and thought, a mental form of the Trinity. Here we can no longer speak of unity, correspondence, or complementarity, not to mention integrality. So I almost don't have anything else to say because he just puts it so succinctly. But it's such a huge difference. No longer are we lost in what the mental world would call the subconscious, where we're lost, like I said earlier, a cosmic cycle of myth and God singing through me, and this sort of cosmic balance. That's been completely shattered. Now things are no longer similar to one another, they are separate from one another. And this confers disunity in the psyche and in the world to a certain extent. Because things have become divided and sectored off. Things are separate from one another. And that's how rational thought operates. But discursive directed thought, that is big. That was not really a big thing before, like I said, the pre-perspectival world, the ancient Greeks. So you have to keep that in mind. Let's see. He says the transition takes place at the turn from the 6th to 5th century BC and is mirrored in the image of Athena springing forth from the head of Zeus. Parmenides, who promulgated his fragmentary didactic poem around 480 BC, spoke the words destined to become the principal motif of the Western world. Togar auto noen estin te kai anai. For thinking and being is one and the same. Think about that for a second. For thinking and being is one and the same. You could probably imagine how the unperspectable world would never come to that conclusion. They wouldn't even know really what thinking is in a mental sense. And being would probably be tied into some vast, grand mythology, cosmogony, or cosmology that has nothing to do with rational thought. Or it's going to be in the magic structure, being is going to be magical forces and unity, like I talked about in that video. So thinking and being is one and the same. So ontology has been reduced or classified as thought itself. This should symbolize or signal the power that thinking, discursive directed thought, has now over man. The mythical world breaks apart. The equivalence of soul and life manifest in the word psyche gives way to the quality of thinking and being. Here the first philosophical statement is formulated, the first spatializing mental manifestation. It was prefigured by many things which become meaningful and lose their accidental and puzzling appearance when viewed from the context of consciousness emergence. The manifestation is evident in sculpture, in architecture, in vase drawing, in painting, in writing, in legislation, in the Orphic mysteries, and in Ionic naturalistic philosophy. Restricting our survey to these areas, let us briefly examine the principal features and their changes, for it is here, in Greece during these centuries, that our world came into being, our world which is now perhaps coming to a close. So again, it is not just philosophy. It is not just logic is now a new thing in philosophy. It is all forms of human expression. Let's see. Now, I don't want to get too. He talks about a couple characteristics that made it more likely that the Greeks specifically would discover space, which in turn would discover the mental conscious structure. One of them was the human body and the Greek sculptures, where they're just sitting around for hours analyzing the human body. Eventually, you're going to start noticing some differences, which presupposes an understanding of space. An understanding of space confers an understanding of difference. Things are different from one another, and they're being sectored off. And that's hallmark of rational thought. Let's see. Here we go. Now I'm skipping ahead a little bit. It can only have been to such a countenance of Thales or Talus of Miletus turned at the beginning of the 6th century. Talus, last of the 7 sages of early Greece and first of the Ionic natural philosophers, to have his exhortation inscribed on the temple of Apollo in Delphi. The lapidary sentence gracing the temple of the sun god, itself a manifestly spatial articulation of singing columns and stones, even today has lost none of its validity. Know thyself. Big. These two words inscribed on the Sun Temple have yet another significance. Since time immemorial, man had written either from top to bottom, as to some extent in China even today, or from right to left, as for example in the Islamic countries. But this exhortation to emergent consciousness, know thyself, is written from left to right. If, as we might say, the first manner of writing connects the heavens with the earth, and the second repeatedly turns the vital connection towards the left. The unconscious and past side we find here for the first time, under the auspices of the wakeful God, the motion towards consciousness emergence, a movement commensurate with the sense of the words themselves. So we have know thyself, which is huge, because we now have knowledge, which is a product of abstract mental thought, as opposed to realizing thought through analogy. Oh shit, he's got it in the. Hold on. Know thyself, of course, signaling an ego subject. That's huge. And of course, let's see. That's right. So the basic attitude and agency of energy, again, this is the synoptic table in the back, which is ever like all these books. They have good charts. It's reflection, abstraction, and will and volition. That are the ways. That is the basic attitude and agency of energy for the mental consciousness structure. So know thyself is knowledge, which is a product of reflection and abstraction, as opposed to in the mythical world, which is psychic in attitude and energy, which is opposed to imagination, sensibility, and disposition. Remember, this is an irrational way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other. We're not doing rational, logical calculating or measuring. What we're doing, we're imagining, we're coming to associations of objects by sensibility, disposition, psychic aspects, what the mental people would call aspects of the subconscious, narrative, myth. It's not a matter of abstract thinking. And then, of course, in the magic, it's all just instinct, drive, emotion, stuff like that. So, know is a product of a certain way of realizing anything in the world, coming to a realization of something. Now, thyself, know thyself. Thyself presupposes an I, but like we said earlier, strong ego, the ability to perceive and to be aware you're perceiving. In the philosophical world and in the psychological world, it's a sense of me, a sense of I, a sense of I am an individual in a particular thing and I want things. I want food, I want money, I want girls, I want whatever. Big thing. And of course, as he said, it's going from left to right. Since ancient times, I think you might say this actually. Yeah, actually, I don't want to skip ahead. And he says, and let us not forget to what it means to grant a phenomenon sense or significance. It is to give it direction. That makes sense. We are direct. Yeah, that makes sense. We're in the world where there's we're trying to aim our measuring thoughts somewhere. And I go, boom, yeah, we have sectored off everything that's relevant. Yes, that's correct. And then he says, oh, that's right. Now check this out. This is expressed in German even today in the locution im Erzeigersen, that is clockwise, but it is even more emphatic in other European language, such as French, where sens has the dual meaning of sense and direction, and the same holds true of English, Italian, and Spanish. It is not just a Western phenomena. The root of these words, sense and direction, give me a sense of direction. That's rational mental thought. When you say things like that, you know you're thinking mentally and rationally, which is not inherently a bad thing. And then he says, since ancient times, the left side has stood for the side of unconscious or the unknown. The right side, by contrast, has represented the side of consciousness and wakefulness. The degree to which this valuation has been reinforced over the years is evident from the fact that in present-day European languages, right does not mean simply to the right or the right side, but also correct and direct in the sense of leading toward a goal. French droit and a la droite, Spanish derecho and a la derecha, and even Greek orthos are all further evidence of this. It is also evident here that law or jurisprudence, as well as the administration of justice, are, in this sense, exclusively directing acts of consciousness unilaterally dependent on waking mental consciousness, a fact apparently overlooked until now by the philosophy of right. Wherever we find rights and the first intimations of a formalized legal code, an act is taking place that can only be brought about via an awakened consciousness. So again, you can look at actually, it's funny. I remember I had that thought when I was like in 5th grade. I thought, because my dad gave me like a very basic political right versus political left, because I asked him because I was like 5th grade. And I thought to myself, it was funny, when if I say you're correct, you're right. But that also could be the political right. And I just didn't think of it because it's just a coincidence, right? It's not really anything. But Gebser says, no, apparently I was onto something. And the same thing can be said with rights, my right to free speech, my right to a gun, my right to be free from illegal search and seizure. That is a directing act. We are directing rights. Rights are a product of directed thought, and we are directing them sort of at you. You have these. You exists in a direction. It's not just the crowd or whatever. You have been sectored off in space and time, or space-time, and we are focusing on you. That's classic mental thought. He said a natural concomitant, it's been a long day, I do apologize. Natural, if we remember that the right side represents the masculine as well as the wakeful principle, is the emphasis on the paternal aspect inherent in every legislation and act of judgment. The directed words over the temple in Delphi are under the protection of Apollo, Mosaic law under that of God the Father. Moses and Lycurgus opened the age of patriarchy. Matriarchy, the sheltered world protected by darkness, is supplanted and being exposed in wakefulness. From this moment on, man had to direct and judge himself. No more God. Herein lies the almost superhuman grandeur of the age that becomes a reality around 500 BC in Greece via the mutation to the mental structure. So, there's other things. Patriarchy. Men take things over. Now, of course, they always took things over in the sense of through violence, and they would run civilization. I'm not denying that. But wakeful consciousness, that is what the mental structure is gold with. Waking consciousness over what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. Keep it there, and we are good. Rationality is an amazing thing. And that's what he's saying. Let's see. Do I want to do one more? Okay. We'll do one more. We'll talk a little bit about Nietzsche. Is there anything I want to? Okay. So we said the relationship between discursive directed thought, emergent consciousness, and space is, we would hope, by now evident, above and beyond the fact that space can exist only where there is possibility of directing and direction, a consideration previously overlooked. The process of divesting the residua of spacelessness was notably strengthened by the Dionysia and Linnea, as they are sometimes called, which took place in Athens ever since the 6th century BC. In these celebrations, besides the frenzied release of the remaining vestiges of darkness via dance and drinking, a certain disenchantment was effected, and there the drama came into being. The word drama means a thing done or performed, but this refers to the ritual presentation to Dionysus and not to the work of the art embodied by the drama. There we go. In such drama, the chorus stood in opposition, as it were, to the individual performers, criticizing or explaining their actions. This means that in the drama, we have an individual who acts in contrast to a, quote, common psyche and distinct from it, even where he is acting in the name of God. Even the leader of the chorus was depersonalized by having to wear a mask. Only the individual was a persona, one through whom the gods sounded. Personar means to sound through. This derivation is a conjecture, but one which had currency even in antiquity. This presumably Etruscan word, persona, was most likely etymologically related to Greek prosopon, mask. The origin of our word person, in the sense of an individual, from the word for mask is, however, of utmost importance if we are to understand the implications of today's lack of mask, particularly if we accept the thesis of J. Gregor that the mask is to be considered a phenomenon apart from time and space. In any event, we can see in the mask a vestige of magic. Magic because of its spacelessness and timelessness, but vestigial as early as the Greek theater, where the performer wearing the mask is placed in opposition to the chorus. The performer was called a hypocritus, which meant essentially the responder. And in the early Greek period, he corresponds mythically as the responding individual soul to the common soul and forms its reciprocal pole. Let me try it again. In the early Greek period, he corresponds mythically as the responding individual soul to the common soul and forms its reciprocal pole. He responds or reciprocates the words of the chorus, subsuming it and establishing the polar equilibrium and polar complement. So there's different ways you can sort of position the individual, we'll say, and the chorus in ancient Greek play. As you said, in early Greek, these were considered polar complements. The chorus, as it said, sung, and the individual actor was sung through, was the vessel that the chorus could sing through. These corresponded and complemented each other, corresponded to each other. The chorus could not channel their song through anything, purely through themselves. They had to channel it through something else, which means it necessitated the individual. And the individual, in order to sing, must have the song sort of transferred into him so he can sing it. That also necessitates the chorus. You can see how, in the mythical way, correspond and complement. They fold in on each other. One is sort of contained within the other. But as he makes it clear, the individual at times can be in contrast or in opposition. This is a dualistic way of viewing the old Greek drama and theater. Let's see what he thinks. But even in tragedy, this process undergoes a change. The performer is no longer a responder in the mythical sense, rather, as an individual, one becoming conscious, he represents the opposite or antithesis of the chorus. There you go. The mask as an expression of magic egolessness gives way to the mask in our modern sense, which depersonalizes or obscures the true ego. The ego concealed behind it in the newly acquired dimension of depth, which is inaccessible to the magic structure as a spatial behind. I'm going to repeat for emphasis because that's a powerful point. The mask as an expression of magic egolessness gives way to the mask in our modern sense, which depersonalizes or obscures the true ego, the ego concealed behind it in the newly acquired dimension of depth, which is inaccessible to the magic structure as a spatial behind. I thought that was interesting. And then this is cool too. He says, in this connection, we should mention to what extent the magic component appears in the very structure of the theater. It is visible in the earliest form of the theater, which, not without justification, has been defined as stone shell or conch. But the ear, too, is conchoidal. And this acoustic labyrinth magic emphasis is the basis for all theater. So when you go to a theater and you see opera or even a movie theater, the unified whole in the dark room or the light room, that's the magic. That's the unity right there. Everyone is sort of contained within this theater. And in being contained, you are now unified together. Yet this magic root is enriched on the one hand by mythical polarity, and on the other by the directedness of the mind. The mythical element is expressed in the polarity created by the passive spectators and the active performers. So the spectators need the performers because without them, they're not really spectating anything, are they? And the performers need the spectators because without them, who cares? No one's going to perceive your performance. You're just pissing in the wind at that point. It means nothing. Everything, as I said. Let's see. The mental element is expressed by the mental direction of the dramatic action that results in spectators and performers, those acted upon and those acting, becoming involved in the same expectation of a goal or end despite their opposing attitudes. I'm just realizing this as I read it. So I think what he's talking about is the logos of a narrative. And shit, let me think about this. I mean, maybe this is an obvious conclusion to come to, but I think what he's saying is great art, at least in this kind of way, should touch all the consciousness structured. It should be magical in a certain sense. It should be mythical. It should be magical, mythical, and mental at the same time. It should be integral in a sense. You shouldn't just make art that is essentially just logic, and you shouldn't only focus on logic. You have to hit the emotional aspects and the narrative and the symbolism in myth and art. I think great art can balance all these things, as he's saying right now. And here he goes. True theater, like all genuine representational forms of man, is a cross-section of at least three structures. And like every other expressive form, it becomes spurious and consequently inhuman whenever one of the structures is overprominent. Maybe I should just let Gebser talk because he puts it a little better than I do. A one-sided overemphasis is not commensurate with our present-day consciousness structure and represents accordingly a falsification. The roots of the frequent falsifications today are already present in the ancient theater, where the polarity was transformed into a duality, which in turn leads to rational isolation. Nonetheless, it was the same theater in which the shift of emphasis resulting from mutation took shape that gradually displaced the importance of the chorus in favor of the individual. This is exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche was talking about, to my understanding, in The Birth of Tragedy. The beautiful aspect of the ancient Greek tragedy and the ancient Greek, I guess, civilization and culture more broadly at a particular time was that it balanced the Dionysian principle, and the Apollonian principle. It balanced the irrational and the rational, the emotional, the unconscious, the understandable, the conscious, the immeasurable, the measurable. It was two poles, mythical thinking, were balanced. That's why it was perfect. What happened was the chorus, representing the Dionysian, the desire for pleasure, joy, sex, boundary dissolution, will, perpetual volition, whereas Apollo was rational reserve, calmness, measured thinking, mental consciousness structure, very calm, think stoic almost. You need that balance, and of course they're both represented, but when Socrates came along and destroyed everything by deploying rationality and destroyed the civilization, he became a rationalist. He said rationality has to take over everything. And of course, if the chorus represents the Dionysian, the irrational, that's going to go. So the chorus was gradually shunned out, and that, in doing so, it is symbolic of the gradual decline of the ancient Greek culture more broadly. Let's see. Nonetheless, okay, and this meant that man stepped out of the shelter. Yeah, okay. And this meant that man stepped out of the shelter of the group which previously surrounded and protected him like a cave. This group spirit attains a kind of awareness of itself for the first time in the Greek chorus, where it became a voice and word. Okay. So that is the benefit of collectivism, having a balanced, moderated respect for the collective drives and aspects in you. There's unity in there. The problem, and we're going to explain this later on in other videos, is that with every mental abstraction, there's a further disunity. You are further dividing things, and there's a real danger. There's a real danger in isolating yourself, dividing the psyche, and then never coming back to reunite things. Because what happens is you isolate yourself, and yes, you attain knowledge at the cost of isolation, which in turn leads to emotional irrationality or violence or aggression. But in doing so, there's a risk because yes, you have an ego, and when done right, you can sort of control things. The problem is you've gained knowledge, but knowledge is always able to be forgotten. And once you've forgotten the knowledge, you've traded off the benefit and you've retained the cost. So now I'm isolated. I have no psychic unity, which is of course going to lead to disaster. And we'll get into that. There is a reason World War II and World War I happened there. There you go. So now we have that, and I don't even have the knowledge that I sacrificed my psychic unity for. Now I feel isolated, I have no protection, and now I'm going to go shoot up a school. Now I'm going to go destroy the world. Now I'm going to go become a transhumanist death cult and try to end humanity and turn us into little cyborgs. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing your game. So I do, listen, I've been very tired. I mentioned earlier in one of these videos that my girlfriend is pregnant, and I've been working a lot. I've been doing school. I've been studying for these videos. I've been doing these videos. So I do apologize if some of the speaking in this video was not the most fluent or the most grammatically correct or eloquent. I do apologize about that. I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to try really hard to save up to try to get a microphone and improve some of the video quality of this stuff. The way this is going, we might even have 3 parts of the mental structure because there's a lot allocated to this. It's probably the length of the magical and mythical combined, so there's a lot to say. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait for you guys to see you guys again, and I love talking with you guys. Like I said, I did an interview with John David Ebert. If you have not checked him out, please go check him out. He is at a different level than mine. That's not false humility. That's just a statement of fact. He will open your mind. I promise you. He's the reason why you're watching me now. So thank you guys. You guys are the best, and I cannot wait to see you guys soon. Sorry again about all the mistakes. I'll see you guys soon.